Hey, welcome back. This is the Mission Mediation podcast. I hope you're joining us from your comfortable zone because this is going to be one exciting podcast episode. So, no matter where you're joining us from, whether it is on LinkedIn or YouTube, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to you. My name is Jonathan. I'm a founder and a mediator at the Pact. I'm also right now based in New Delhi, but happy to hop onto any flight wherever mediation is required. I'm really excited about this episode. It's episode 8 on the Mission Mediation podcast, and we have got a special guest joining us all the way from Singapore. It's the Singapore Mediation Convention Week coming up very soon, and of course, it was, I think, just the right time to bring in someone really special, someone who we really wanted to have on the podcast with us. Joy Lee joining us, and before I introduce him to you, if you haven't seen the older episodes of the Mission Mediation podcast, you can either go to LinkedIn or to YouTube, and you'll get to see that on record there. So make sure you catch up on all the essentials of mediation on the Mission Mediation podcast. If you're joining us on LinkedIn, you can use the comment section. You can question us. You can send us an opinion. You don't have to always agree with whatever we are saying. So make sure you do express yourself. If you don't agree with what we are saying, or if you do agree with what we are saying, do drop in your comments in the LinkedIn section. You can also tell us where you're joining us live from. We'd like to hear from you, and of course, add on to any insights you throw at us. Joy Lee, it's difficult to introduce Joy Lee to a community if you are in the mediation circles. You already know Joy Lee unless you're living under the rock, which is not a good place to be as a mediator, right? And I've known Joel Mo as a friend and a mentor since 2016 now, I think, or 2015. I'm not quite sure, but it's been a long time. We met a couple of times after that. The rumor has it he's one of the most sought out teachers of mediation in the world. When he puts out a course, those tickets sell like hotcakes, even more than a Taylor Swift ticket. It's always a full house wherever you are. And so much sought after here with us in the Mission Mediation podcast. Joel, I've always loved the candor in which we can discuss some very, very intense topics on mediation. And that's what I've appreciated the most. Been in the space myself for the last so many years now. I've always wanted to emulate you. Of course, be myself. But I said if Joy Lee can be himself in a classroom, then so can I. And so that's given me a lot of confidence, taking forward my mission on the mission mediation sphere in India as well for the last so many years. But thank you so much for doing this, Joel.
Thank you, Jonathan, for having me, for telling those wonderful lies about me, because those are sweet little lies. Please tell me more; it's all good. I'm very sure Taylor Swift considers herself far more attractive than I am, but that's okay. No, pleasure to be here. I value our friendship, and we've always enjoyed our conversation. So looking forward to this one.
Yeah, we got to be careful with the Swifties there. So I'm not going to say too much more about that. But, here's something interesting for those of you who really don't know who Joy Lee is. He is a professor of mediation at the Faculty of Law at the National University of Singapore. He's, of course, co-pioneer teaching negotiation and mediation in so many different universities in Singapore. Of course, he's a graduate of the Victoria University of Wellington and the Harvard Law Schools. Joy is a principal mediator at the Singapore Mediation Center and a master trainer with the Peacemakers. But he's also the founding chair and the board of the Singapore International Mediation Institute. And it's, of course, the most interesting thing, I think, of all this is a certified trainer of the neuro-linguistic programming, which has really got us into some very interesting conversations in the past as well. But today's topic is self-determination, a very scary topic. In fact, when I've used that term before, self-determination, it scared a lot of parties in the pre-mediation stage. It also seems like a very simple topic, doesn't it? When we talk about principles of mediation, we talk about voluntariness and confidentiality and neutrality. And then the fourth one is sometimes self-determination, or as some mediators like to call it, party autonomy, which basically means parties having the choice to make their own decisions, to come up with their own decisions. And on this special series now on the Mission Mediation podcast, we're trying to highlight some of these principles. We're trying to kind of breathe fresh life and simplify what these principles mean. And on the Mission Mediation podcast, you have users joining us, you have lawyers, judges, sometimes watching this on record. You have business folks watching this on record. And I want them listening in to kind of understand why self-determination is such a unique aspect of mediation, especially in the private mediation space. So, Joel, over to you to oversimplify this very simple concept of self-determination.
Well, thanks for that, and I actually appreciate greatly that you're focusing a lot on the values of mediation. Internationally, there are many sort of approaches to mediation, many processes, and so on and so forth. So we could be tempted to think that they are all different and they're conflicting. But I think fundamentally, the creature that is mediation is identified by certain values, right? And one of those values, which you mentioned a little bit earlier, is confidentiality. But the other one is, as you phrase it, self-determination. And so really, as a starting point, maybe I'd like to sort of take a little bit of a devil's advocate position to it. I understand what you mean by self-determination. You also said that parties, sometimes they say party autonomy.
Yeah.
Right. The term that I generally will refer to is the word agency. That parties have agency. And a manifestation of agency really is voluntariness. Right. So I think those four terms, voluntariness, self-determination, party autonomy, agency, are all looking at this concept from different perspectives, right? To be honest, when you first said self-determination, I had to think a little bit hard about what you might have meant, simply because it's not a term that we typically use.
Okay.
Nothing wrong with that, of course, but also that I am familiar with the term of self-determination from the area of human rights and governance. Right, so we usually talk about the rights of peoples to self-determination and so on and so forth, right? And I don't want to be seen to be splitting hairs at the moment, but I think there is a slight difference between self-determination and agency or party autonomy.
Okay.
Right? I think self-determination is the principle that we try to hold fast to. It's important. But agency is what parties experience, right? They experience something, they feel something in mediation, which we label as self-determination. But I'm not sure that they will, and which could explain why in pre-mediations parties may freak out a little bit when you start talking about self-determination, because it may not be something that fits like their worldview. Does that make sense? Yeah?
Yeah.
So if we are on the same page, Jonathan, you and I, about saying that we are really talking about the party's right to choose, the party's power to choose, as it were. Okay, if we want to avoid language of rights, okay, then I'm full agreement with you. We can call it whatever we want. I mean, we can call it Alice in Wonderland if we wanted to, but it really is about the agency of the parties. It's about the autonomy of the parties to choose. Okay, but the only question is to choose what. Okay, and I suspect that's going to be stuff that we're going to be talking about a fair bit.
Yeah, and I think it's so cultural in many contexts. A lot of people use the word choice, the guarantee of choice. As you said, a lot of in some contexts, I think a lot of people use agency, of course, party autonomy. But at the same, at the core of all this, I guess, to simplify it, it's basically the space where people in dispute can make their own decisions, and you're unlike litigation or arbitration where you're sending in a power of attorney and you're staying back from these difficult conversations. Here you are kind of brought into that space where you have to make those decisions yourself, and that can be quite intimidating for some people who would rather be away from the epicenter of conflict, sitting right opposite someone who you really don't want to sit with.
Sorry to interrupt. I mean, it's true in the sense that there might. There's obviously a psychological challenge, right? If you and I, Jonathan, are in conflict, and it's a bad conflict, I may not be comfortable, being face to face with you and playing a role in my destiny, as it were, right?
Right.
Or it might be I'm a conflict avoider. So even if our conflict is not a bad conflict, and you're being a perfectly nice person, I might come from a background or personality type or culture where basically says, I just want harmony and I'll just avoid it.
Yeah.
I'll try to accommodate. Do you know what I'm saying, right?
Yeah.
And so there may be many different reasons why people are uncomfortable with the notion of saying, I'm going to give you choice, I'm going to give you agency.
Yeah, but also I think from a space of like, I know of a mediator who once told me that they refused to get into a mediation because there was one side who was absent. Of course, they were willing to mediate. They showed tremendous, I would say, progress in terms of how they were prepping for mediation. Um, there was very clear there were very clear signs that they were intending to settle. There was the right mood, but they just said that I'm not going to be in the room. I'm going to send in my lawyer. Right? The lawyer is being briefed. The lawyer was part of the prep. The lawyer was part of the pre-mediation conversations, and they just said that I don't want to be there in the room. It's a trigger for some reason. I just don't want to be in the room.
Sure.
And the mediator said, no, I can't take up this case, because if the other side's coming by themselves, like the party is there by themselves, and on the other, so party A is party N lawyer and party B is basically just a lawyer. There's no party B in the room. And he said that kind of defeats the dynamics of, what I'm comfortable in working with the mediation setting. And
Sure.
I don't know whether this is related to self-determination, but I just thought that this is an example just popped up in my head at this point in time.
Yeah.
Of course, I know it
Yeah.
comes in space of process design and all that stuff, but I think once again, when I deep dived into this with the mediator, they said that it felt like one person was there at the table making those choices, whether the other person kind of handed it over to someone else.
Yeah.
And it was a different kind of a psychological dynamic in the
Yeah.
room.
Yeah. No, that's right. I mean, it's the same as negotiating through agents rather than in person. There are things that are positive and negative on each side of that. Let me be very clear. I preface what I'm about to say. I don't think the mediator was incorrect in his or her choice to do what he or she did.
Okay.
But I want to analyze what you just raised, the situation you just raised, from a self-determination perspective, right? If we really are talking about agency, we're really talking about self-determination, then shouldn't we respect the party's choice to operate through his or her counsel only?
Yeah.
Right? Now, I appreciate from a mediator's perspective, that screws stuff up, right?
Yeah.
So lucky I didn't say worse than the word screw, but that really messes stuff up for us.
Yeah.
Can we edit that? No, but if we truly are about self-determination, can we not say that that party was well within his or her rights to choose how he wishes to engage? It's not that the guy says, I don't want to engage. The guy is saying, I'm not sure I can be in the room, I'm able to be in the room to engage meaningfully. And for me, the right choice is through my counsel, right? And so if I just analyze that in just sort of that plain stark sort of framework, that's self-determination. Okay. Now, I'm not saying all acts of self-determination in a mediation must be accepted or respected. So we can have a conversation about that. But if we just analyze the structure of what he did, it was self-determination. And I think that rings a bell, right? Really, to us, right, as mediators.
Yeah, absolutely. I think from a perspective of where does it start, because I also feel like sometimes it does get into this, it overlaps with another principle of mediation called voluntariness, right? Self-determinant, and it not just overlaps, I think it complements it in many ways. I feel like there is still confusion about and misunderstanding about what self-determination actually means.
Right.
Because when we talk about voluntariness, we talk about it mostly from a perspective of participating, just being there, even if it just means being there, saying yes to mediation, signing that agreement to mediate. That's the voluntariness aspect, or that's the voluntary aspect of mediation. But I think self-determination is often reserved for the settlement part of it, where you're kind of co-creating solutions, co-creating options, and it's kind of reserved for that part of mediation, which is where I think it often gets into this murky waters where we don't know how to explain these concepts, and we kind of use the same word and almost parallelly and synonymously, and between voluntariness and self-determination. So
Well, let's talk about that particular sort
yeah.
of elephant, as it were, right? Um, uh, I hope, Jonathan, that after this conversation you won't regret it completely and never invite me again, or never talk to me again, because I'm going to say something that's probably a little bit different from sort of mediation orthodoxy, but I think more and more people are sort of coming on board with this sort of different view. So when I was a younger mediator, when I was a younger academic, I would have fought to the death this whole notion of voluntariness. Right. And as I mentioned a little bit earlier, I think that voluntariness has a certain overlap with the notion of self-determination or agency autonomy.
Yeah.
Right. And so back in the day, I would say parties must voluntarily go into mediation. Parties must voluntarily engage in it, the process. Right. And parties must obviously voluntarily enter into a settlement agreement if one is possible.
Right.
And those were very, very clear lines for me. My views have changed over the last 30 over years, because I think context matters.
Okay.
And countervailing sort of policy considerations matter. So for me, the bright red line that we as mediators never can cross, right, is that we cannot impose a decision on the parties. We don't have that power, not our role. Yeah.
Right.
And I think we're in agreement on that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think, but fundamentally, parties must choose to enter into or not enter into the settlement agreement that is potentially in front of them, right? That is the bright red line that I will draw. Okay, so any sort of pressuring, any strong arm tactics, right? Any threats, stuff that we could consider vitiating factors in contract law, would not be acceptable in my mind in those kinds of things. I'm agnostic about voluntariness everywhere else. Okay, so let me give you an example. In Singapore, for example, both family mediations and certain community mediations are mandatory.
Okay.
Right. So you have to be channeled through it. The rules of court in Singapore for commercial disputes pretty much strongly sort of recommend mediation, almost to the point as if you don't go to mediation, it seems very strange. Right. So there's a very strong mandatory feel to it. Right. And of course, the common objection is, well, but then that's no longer voluntary.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah.
But to my mind, I think that what is crucial is voluntariness into entering into the settlement agreement, not voluntariness entering into mediation itself. Let me share why. The first reason I will say is that it's not always easy to persuade parties to go to mediation, right?
Yeah.
I think it's a common experience. But what sometimes makes it more challenging is that the gateway are lawyers. Now, I'm a lawyer. I've got friends who are lawyers, and I'm not saying that they're all bad. All I'm saying is that there are many lawyers who are not clear about what it means to be a mediation advocate or to be mediation friendly. So they in good faith act like a lawyer would in arbitration litigation, and without realizing that may not be the appropriate things to do. So they may actually block their clients. They may downplay mediation. Even though they're doing all of this in good faith, right? So it actually hinders the opportunities for parties to say, let's try mediation first, because the potential benefits of them are tremendously high, right? And if we don't succeed, we can still go to litigation and arbitration and all of that, right? And so in Singapore, our experience has been that we've had to sort of introduce levers, things like cost orders, for example, ADR presumptions or ADR forms in the state courts. We'd have to introduce those things so as to essentially very strongly push people in the direction of mediation. Because we all know that internationally, I mean, maybe not all our listeners know this particular statistics, but internationally, 7 out of 10 disputes that go to mediation result in a settlement agreement, right? Now, that's a 70% sort of settlement rate. That's pretty high, right? Which means, and of course, I can guarantee that of those 10 disputes, when they went into mediation, the lawyers or the parties have tried to settle and they failed to settle. So they will go in convinced that it will never settle, but yet something happens in mediation, some magic happens, which we all know what it is. 7 out of 10 of them settle. So the greater good is to say, hey, we need to have mechanisms to channel people into these things so that they could potentially harvest the 70% benefit, right? That's one consideration, right? Changing cultures. The second consideration is policy concerns. So, for example, I mean, in Singapore back in the day, 30 over years ago, some of the concerns was, of course, the heavy case load in courts, right? So there was one way of managing the caseload. I'm not saying that that's a good or great reason or a bad reason. I'm just saying it is what it is. That was the fact. Okay, but in family matters, when parties are dissolving their marriage and they have children involved, I think for the greater good. In Singapore, we're moving towards what we call therapeutic justice in family matters, right? For the greater good, mediation is strongly advised, right? Because it just serves a better group. So I guess what I'm saying, and sort of in a very long-winded way, and I apologize, is that the voluntariness in other aspects of mediation may not be a bright red line. It's not a binary. It's a contextual. Whereas the one that is binary is entering into that settlement agreement. Does that make sense?
You've done the diplomacy in saying that you do agree with mandatory mediation. That's the hot topic.
It is. Now I just wait for all the emails that come back to me and say, "Oh, what the hell."
Yeah, I can just cut off this section and put it out on YouTube, and it's going to get a lot of attention for sure.
Joy, you won't ever see me again. I'll be writing letters from some gulag.
Yeah, headlines: Joy Lee recommends mandatory mediation. but I knew this would happen. I knew that we would once again we would be struggling to draw that line between voluntariness and self-determination. I'm going to come to that in a bit, but I think you raised an interesting point about two different things that are very crucial to this aspect or principle of mediation called self-determination, and that is the cultural context. And this is, I think, a great segue into what we want to get into next, and that is, for some reason, I feel self-determination as a concept and justice are not just a match. Like, they're two different things. And when you whether it's the court systems or the lawyers, when you are faced in front of a very emotional person who's gone through conflict, which has spiraled into a massive dispute, there's baggage there. The person has gone through a lot of psychological, financial, social, emotional, I would say, distress, and then they're sitting there, and you're saying, "Listen, I'm gonna fight for you. I'm gonna pursue justice for you." But how about collaborative justice? Instead of someone else, a stranger third party, maybe in arbitration that's someone you appoint, so you know them, but in litigation you can't. It's someone who you don't know at all. Maybe the lawyers know them, but the party doesn't know the judge. Sure. How about a third party help us find justice, decide who's right and wrong? But you know what? Before we get there, how about we find justice for ourselves? And so, when you look at it from a bigger perspective, when you're saying, yes, we got to start inviting people to get into mediation and make it a mandatory thing, when they themselves got into the space saying, "I want someone else to decide for me." I want someone else to decide for me whether I was right or wrong, whether they were right or wrong. I want to make sure that I get justice. And now you're saying, hey, let's take a pause on arbitral justice. Let's look at collaborative justice where we can find this for ourselves. And that sometimes is very hard for people uh, to even fathom, because they are at a space where they just don't want to be sitting across the other person. So uh, I just want to kind of lay that out for you, because you did talk about cultural changes and contexts that need to be taken into consideration when we talk about self-determination.
I mean, that's actually a lot to unpack there. I remember, right? We have 3 hours, right? Is that just kidding? Just kidding.
No.
I know we're limited time. So there are a number of ways we can sort of approach what you just brought up. I think having a conversation with your client or having a conversation with your parties, about collaborative justice, they will look at you as blankly as when you talk to them about self-determination.
Yeah.
I mean, I think those words are meaningful to us. We know what they mean. And to be honest, not everybody, even in the legal industry, understands what collaborative justice is. They may not even have heard of it.
Yeah.
Right? So we're using some quite technical terms, right? And maybe, one of the things is that we need to learn to talk to our parties and our clients in language that we can leverage them.
Absolutely.
And they understand, right? But for us, we know, we kind of know what we're talking about.
And that's why the podcast, Joel. I said I'm going to come with all the technical words and throw them at you, and then you're going to simplify.
And I'm going to avoid them. I'm going to avoid them.
Yeah,
right?
The ones that you can't avoid, then you're going to simplify them for the audience.
One hopes. Hey, I'm a professor. I'm that's not my job to simplify things, man. I take a simple thing, make it really complex. Okay, so I'll try. I think it's the word justice is thrown around a little bit too much, and I want to go back to the term self-determination as well.
Okay.
Because as I said, it comes from a rights-based sort of dialogue and narrative and framework, right? And I suspect that the word self-determination or the concept self-determination is favored by cultures and nations which have a rights-oriented approach to seeing the world, right? So we're looking at places like the US, the UK. Many of the Western countries have a rights, oriented approach to it, right? And so I'm not even sure that we can internationally agree what rights actually means, right? Now, I can already hear sort of my teacher inside my ear, who taught me international law saying, but human rights are fundamental.
Yeah.
Right. And but that may be true. I mean, we've all signed up to the United Nations Human Rights, all of that. That's fine. Although the conversation, the narrative for human rights was also strongly influenced by the West. Right. And many countries, including Singapore, because we wanted to modernize, we wanted to be sort of, legitimate, bought into that narrative, bought into that kind of language, that kind of lexicon, right? Yeah. But then we're beginning to realize that maybe that doesn't all apply. So, for example, the notion of the right to privacy in some quarters is considered a human right. Okay, so what used to be fundamental human rights, right to life, right of freedom, and all of that, has of course expanded, right? And it now might include the right to the internet, which I agree, we need to have the right to the internet, but the right to privacy. Now, in many Asian countries, we don't hold that as that fundamental, right? Now I might regret this because then suddenly my data is all gone missing. But you get my point. So I think the danger to assume that when we say something like rights or self-determination, that it is shared and see, even if they use the same words, that is seen the same way, is dangerous, right? And we as mediators know this. We use the same words but different perceptions, different meanings. Okay. Now, then if we then start looking at things like justice. Right, I teach a 12-week course to first years on the Singapore legal system, and we will always talk about justice. And in day one, when I talk about justice, I tell them I have no idea what it means. Okay, maybe by the end of 12 weeks, we might have some idea. And at the end of 12 weeks, I tell them, no, we still have no idea what it means, because justice means many different things to many different people. Okay? The problem with the word justice is that it often gets thrown around and is associated with either the court system or the arbitral system, right? So back in the day, in the 90s, for example, mediation was referred to in England and many other countries as second-hand justice, cheap justice, right? And obviously derogatory, not justice at all. Okay.
Yeah. Even today.
Never mind.
Even today.
Yeah,
in many places.
even today. I mean, I like to think that in England it's improved. In Singapore, it's certainly improved. Because in England, I cannot remember which law lord had said this, but he literally said that mediation is now a parallel track to justice, parallel to litigation arbitration, and lawyers cannot with impunity ignore it, right? And this was the day when the UK was trying to shift people to mediation. In Singapore, the Chief Justice of Singapore, Sundaresh Menon, a man who I respect greatly, has basically said similar things, right?
Yeah.
That actually mediation provides justice, and we need to be a little bit less narrow about what justice means. Now, the problem is for the layperson, it makes no difference. So when a layperson has a problem, and you're my lawyer, Jonathan, I come to you, I'm upset, I'm angry, I'm pissed off.
Yeah.
Right? And basically, you're right. I want to go somewhere and have somebody tell me I'm right. And unfortunately, many lawyers either don't do this or don't have the skill sets to do this. They don't actually de-escalate the client. Sometimes they add oil to the flame, as it were, right? Okay. Yeah. So sometimes they say, yes, I'll fight for you. We'll be able to win, 110% chance of winning and whatever. And it's fine if you're a litigator, you're fine, you're an arbitrator. But the difficulty is if your goal is to help your client solve the problem. And this goes to what we understand to be ADR. I was just joking with some people the other day that in India, is where I first heard it, ADR stands for an alarming drop in revenue. Right? We understand it to be alternative dispute resolution, but nowadays, at least in Singapore, we call it appropriate dispute resolution. And the idea being that the lawyer's job is in part to help their client find the most appropriate way to solve the problem. So the client may come in upset. The client may come in saying, the bastard over there hurt me, however that might be defined, breached the contract, whatever. I want him to pay. I want justice and all that. And after that venting, I think it's part of the lawyer's job to actually calm the client down and say, okay, listen, what are your goals here? Yeah. And your goals may be justice in the traditional sense, or your goal may be get your money back, or your goal may be a bunch of number of different things. And how much are you willing to put in to get these goals, right? Now, I promise you this is relevant to self-determination, right, and justice, right? So I think fundamentally, when we talk about collaborative justice, when we talk about therapeutic justice, restorative justice, which is broad terms that mediation has often been associated with, we're talking about healing. Okay, we're talking about reconnecting people who have become disconnected. We're talking about finding practical and more meaningful solutions, more sustainable solutions to the problems we face. And we don't yet have a way, I think, to meaningfully guide people in that direction. Because when they come in thinking about justice in the traditional way, because we've all watched too many movies, right? Okay, or been so affected by our culture, right? It's very hard for them to hear. They may not even know what we're talking about, right? So I mean, we face this problem all the time, right? When we teach law students, it takes a while for them to even get what we're talking about. Never mind agree with us, right? So I think firstly, if we're going to talk to clients, let's reframe justice, or even avoid that term itself. Let's get them to focus on what's priorities for them, what's important for them, and how we might be able to assist them. Right?
I like that. So instead of saying I'm going to get you justice, you're more focused on what are your interests. Let's try and get you your interests. And when you use that, when you're saying change terminology, change culture, change mindsets, when you're using the a different word altogether, because you rightly said that, and I know you've taken the time to explain that, but you rightly said that justice is looked at it very in such a narrow sense that in some spaces mediation is looked on as not even justice. I think in some places it's looked as a compromise, and that's
Yeah.
probably because it's been looked at in such a narrow lens. So when you change the terminology right in the start and say, what are your interests? Let's get you those interests. Suddenly, that's a different conversation. We've not used the word justice because justice always, in most people's minds, especially if you're deep into conflict, deeply entrenched into conflict,
There's
you're
baggage.
looking at justice as let's destroy the other person. That's justice for me.
That's right.
Right? And
That's
so
right. That's
I think self-determination in many ways is such a beautiful term. And I know it's a complicated term, but I think it's also a very beautiful term to kind of express where mediation's not compromise. And where mediation is a very proactive exercise where you're not just splitting something into half, or you're not just giving away everything. You're actually engaging in the hustle of co-creating something. It's not just a compromise, it's a collaboration. And I know
yeah.
we're throwing things out
And it's
here.
basically it's
Yeah,
basically about giving them choice, right? It's basically saying,
correct.
you know what, if you go to court, if you go to arbitration, it will take things away from you, right?
Yeah.
And what it will take away from you is actually control,
Mm.
right? And so if you want to have a little bit of control about how things go, if you want to have a little bit of
Yeah.
control about what the solution looks like, right? Mediation can help you, right? Because I think most people, if you tell them you have choice, they may not want it.
Yeah.
But if you ask them, do you like being out of control? Most people are
Yeah.
going to tell you, no, I don't like to be out of control. So you can easily reframe choice as control, right? Control. The question is control over what, right? Okay. And so in this case, control over whether you enter into mediation or not, assuming it's not mandatory, right? Control over your choice of mediator, control over the process where that's possible, right? It's not
Yeah.
always, but where that's possible, right? Control over the things you say and how it is said, and in a sense, owning a little bit of your destiny, right? Control over your destiny as to where it goes. Now, of course, it takes two hands to clap. I understand this. So if the other side isn't also playing ball, it may not always be
Yeah.
possible. But it's about both sides choosing to assert control over their life, right? Because
We've
otherwise,
brought
the lawyers will
Yeah,
take
sorry,
control.
Jordan.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think talking about control once again, I want to get into this really interesting segment here because I think control, right, it fits into that. We brought up so many words starting with C today, right on the start of collaboration, choice, control being the latest. If I had to summarize, I think self-determination into two parts. One would be control. I like what you're saying in terms of control. That a lot of people want that, and they sometimes don't realize they get that in mediation. Um, because of everything else that surrounds it and all the negative PR that surrounds in terms of the social negative PR that people say, okay, don't go mediation, you'll be
Sure.
looked as a weak person. But actually, you're not a weak person if you take mediation because you actually have control. And I think that's something that's it's underrated in terms of a selling point in mediation many times. But I want to get into the
Actually,
second
Jonathan,
aspect.
so before you get into that, Jonathan,
Yeah.
I would even say, I would even reframe it this way. I would literally say that actually, going to mediation isn't weak. In fact, you'd be weak if you went to arbitration or litigation. Why? Because you decided to seek control, right?
Yeah.
But anyway, I interrupted you. You were about to bounce into a different point.
No, I mean, you're right. You're kind of giving up control. You're letting that go right from the start. So the control is one big aspect of self-determination. I want to get into the second big aspect of self-determination, that is creating. To be creative, to actually brainstorm, to make something happen proactively yourself. That is something
Yep.
you give away. You give that away in litigation. You give that away in arbitration, but you have that for yourself in mediation. Now, many times that is not what people desire. They don't want it.
Nope.
They don't want
Yeah.
to create it by themselves. They don't want to be in the hustle of brainstorming a solution by themselves. They would rather have a stranger sitting there doing that for themselves.
Yeah.
So is this got to do with, once again, cultures? Is this how has it
It
been
may be.
appreciated? How has it been appreciated? You think in in the East compared, because this is, of course, in many ways a Western concept, right? And I've had these
Yeah.
conversations with my mediator friends in the US and the UK, and they do say that it is, at the end of the day, a clash in terms of individualist and collectivist cultures. Back here in India,
Well,
we are a
yeah.
huge collectivist culture. So
Yeah.
the idea
No,
of
no, no. Fair
creating
enough.
by yourself is sometimes not really appreciated.
Well, this is a bit tricky, right? It's
Yeah.
it's like people may want control or choice. Today's I don't know. Did you ever watch Sesame Street, Jonathan? Do you know what Sesame Street is?
I did watch a couple of episodes, but not the whole
Yeah.
the series. Yeah.
You know at the end they always say that this today's episode is brought to you by the letters whatever. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
So today's podcast is brought to you by the letter C. Okay. So in terms
What's the next
people
C?
may want people may want control, that's a C, but they don't want responsibility. So there is an inherent tension there, I think, that people sometimes prefer other people to make suggestions or to give
Yeah.
a solution simply because they get to blame somebody else later.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, this is one of the reasons why we sometimes say that mediators shouldn't suggest solutions, because you might get blamed for a bad outcome
Yeah.
later, right? But you know me, Jonathan, I drank the Kool-Aid on sort of facilitative mediation. I drank the Kool-Aid on parties, and unfortunately, in reality, not all mediations work out that way, right? We all know this. We have parties where we go, okay, what ideas do you have? And the crickets, the sound of crickets and it's just silence. And then you have to find some other ways to find possible solutions, right? So I think there is an ideal that we work towards, just as self-determination is an ideal we work towards, but we need to understand that it's actually part of a continuum, a spectrum of sorts, right? I'm not sure I entirely agree that in the West, like the US, that they want that kind of choice and creativity and all that, because I've heard tell that they are on the West Coast. People don't like the facilitative model; they like a little bit more of the
Okay.
directive model, and you tell them, the mediator tells them what might kind of be the solution looking like, and then they'll fight over that, right? So I'm not sure it's necessarily individualistic collectivist, although I accept that there might be that distinction. I think that in Singapore, at least, many people are a little bit more reserved. They're not afraid. They're more risk averse. They're not likely to put something on the table because it's risky, right? It's the same reason why mediation is beneficial sometimes, because people don't want to make the first move to go into mediation because they're afraid of being seen as weak.
Yeah.
Right. So mandatory mediation actually kind of very neatly avoids that problem. So I think if parties want to be creative, that's great. If parties don't want to be, then we need to be able to prime the well, because sometimes, Jonathan, are you familiar with the old wells? You know, the one where there's this little pump where you have to pump
the bore wells. Yeah.
The very old water pumps. There's a concept called priming the well. I apologize if you already know this, but basically sometimes the well, the thing needs to have water put in, so that when you pump it, it will draw water out. But when there's no water in there, right? However you pump, even though there's water under the bedrock, it can't come out. Right? The science to it. Right?
I've seen this happen in real life in my home. So yeah.
Yeah. So you know you know this for a fact. Now mediation is very similar. Sometimes it's not that the well is dry; there is water, but we can't access it. That's when the mediator has to find very creative ways. So he himself or she herself has to be very creative to find ways to prime the well.
Yeah.
Right. And of course, one way is to come up with a number of different options or variations, and then get parties to criticize them, for example, right?
Okay.
And criticizing them then would maybe flush out interest and maybe strengthen whatever options are on the table. As a result of that conversation, the parties may then become a little bit more comfortable putting their ideas on the table, right?
Right.
So even something like creativity, in terms of that choice, why can't I, as a party, say to you, Jonathan, Mr. Mediator, I choose not to be creative, and you're impinging upon my right of self-determination here by insisting that I be creative. Why can't you respect my right? Right? I mean,
Right.
it cuts both ways. This whole, so after a while, I can just play the self-determination card and frustrate you.
Mhm.
Right? Okay. That's why I think that we must be
It's
very
like
careful.
it's
What's
almost
already
like it's like an Uno reverse of sorts.
it's a Uno reversal, right? If I was
Yeah,
smart, I just use it against you, right?
it's
Right?
interesting. Once
Yeah.
again, I really, because I think from I know, so I think if you're clear about it right from the start, as a mediator, that this is what you should expect from me. As a mediator, I will be probing, especially in the caucus sessions. I will be asking you questions, difficult questions that you have not been asked before, and that's all to kind of get you to think out of the box, get you to think of, of your blind spots, and start moving forward. But you're right in terms of, if the party says, listen, I don't want to participate in the brainstorming, you tell me what it is, because I'm coming to you with this point, and I want to wrap this up on this by saying, for a lot of jurisdictions, developing mediation jurisdictions like India, where we are trying to build a profession out of private mediation practice,
Yeah. Yeah.
when you're trying to sell your set of skills as a mediator, all right, you talk about problem solving skills, communication skills, process design skills, prepping skills, coaching skills, all that kind of stuff. You're bringing all that in, and you're saying, here's what I bring to the table, and this is how I'm different as a professional from anything else out there. Don't confuse me with a psychologist or a money recovery agent or whatever else that's out there, right? I'm different. And sometimes they'll pop you that one last question: will you help me with a solution? Will you help drive sense into the other person? Will you help us get into a middle ground, a solution? And when I say, will you help us get in the middle ground, they want you to define the option. They want you to spell it out. And a lot of times, I see ourselves uh, kind of escaping that moment. We are running away from that moment. And we are afraid of that situation, because we have been taught that mediation is a facilitative process. And so, self determination, if it is one of the principles, then you have to respect the sanctity of that, and you can't get into co-creating the solution with them. And that's where I feel sometimes it's a huge disservice in terms of sales mediation, in terms of
Yeah.
marketing mediation, in the
But
private
Jonathan,
mediation space.
again, I'm gonna push on that. I'm gonna say, who says you can't? Okay, right?
It's what we've been taught. It's what we've been taught.
Yeah,
You see
I
any
get it.
training
It's the
module,
Kool-Aid.
any
It's the
training
Kool-Aid.
module.
It's the Kool-Aid.
Yeah,
It's the Kool-Aid,
yeah,
right? And
exactly.
and those of us who drive have been taught a certain way, right?
Yeah.
But as we get better as we're driving, we occasionally
Hmm.
drive better by not following some of the rules. No, everybody, please don't take me to be saying don't follow the rules, follow the rules. But what I'm saying is that
Yeah.
as you develop skill, right,
Mhm.
you begin to see nuance and complexity, and therefore your choices you make become more sophisticated, right?
Right.
Okay, so I mean, I think one of the dangers of is sometimes we also put together ideas that shouldn't be put together. So I think, for example, that the idea of self-determination is not intrinsically or intimately tied or unavoidably tied to facilitation. You can be a directive mediator and still respect people's autonomy,
Yeah.
right? So there's the whole Riskin's grid, which I understand that for many years he's been trying to debunk himself, because I
Yeah.
think he regretted coming out with the Riskin's grid. Basically, he came out with an idea, people ran with it, okay, and he ran it in a direction that he never intended, right?
Mm.
So this whole facilitative, evaluative, directive divide is I think trying to categorize things when actually they're not categorizable in a sense, right? It's like saying, is a platypus a mammal or not? They can't tell. It has manifest, sort of characteristics of different things. Okay, and I think mediation can be a little bit like a platypus, right?
Mm.
And the notion that actually sometimes the circumstances may call for a particular type of behavior. So in Asia, for example, we respect people who are senior,
Yeah.
right? We say in culture terms, high power distance index, right? In those kinds of situations, we may actually look to our mediator to take some leadership,
Yes. That's the
right?
expectation. Yeah.
Right. And therefore, to at least, don't look at us, what the hell are we paying you so much money for? Why are you
Exactly. Yeah.
looking at us and asking us for the solution? And are you going to do any work at all? Right? It's the thing, right? But then again, they will also respect your opinion, right? And of course, the danger is then for you to substitute your opinion for their choice, right? Which is with the sort of the paradox and the tension, right? I think, and I know we're short of time, but I feel it important to make this particular point. I know I made a sort of a big song and dance about how, right, agency, self-determination, autonomy, whatever we call it, is important when it talks about the decision to enter into a settlement agreement or not. Everything else is more flexible. All right. Okay. But
So
I will be.
are we saying that self-determination, if you choose not to participate in co-creating a solution, in brainstorming
Or if
more options,
or circumstances may say we mandate you go to mediation, so that effectively taking the choice
right?
away
Okay,
from you, right?
that's
Okay.
still
Right.
self-determination.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
there is an exercise of self-determination where I would disagree with parties. So, for example, if the parties say to you, as a mediator, I exercise my right to self-determination and I want you to impose a decision on us. Okay? Okay. Now, they've exercised their right to self-determination, but this is the instance where I will say, as a mediator, you cannot respect it. You can respect their decision, but you cannot comply with it because that's not mediation, right? So we still have to be mindful as to what mediation actually is.
Yeah.
And I'm not a judge. You cannot ask me to impose a decision upon you, even if you give me the power,
Yeah.
right? I will not do that. I'm not trained for it, right? So I hope our listeners don't go away and saying, well, that gives me perfect permission to. No,
Yeah.
right? Mediation still has very strong parameters defining what it is. It's just that what I'm saying is that some of those parameters are contextual specific.
Absolutely, and I think a lot of times this also has got to do in terms of what kind of process, what kind of context the mediation is referred and initiated and started.
Sure.
Court and ex mediations in India are more, I would say, limited in terms of luxury of time and structure. So you have mediators who have 1 hour with both parties, and they don't have the time because they got to send that file back to the judge in a month's time, 2 months time, 3 months time.
That's right.
And so you really don't have the time to explore self-determination in terms of co-creating solutions together. And because of the lack of luxury of time, you tend to be quite more open in terms of your style, and you're more open to kind of giving in to suggestions and opinions. But as you correctly pointed out there, you cannot go and cross the line wherein you're saying, listen, you either take this into consideration. I'm sending your file back to the judge. That's coercion. That's strength. That's
That's the
actually.
line we do not cross as mediators. Yeah.
But this is interesting. I think I know we're coming to the end of the session, but if you've joined us for the last one, or you've been watching us, and you're completely confused, that's all right. If we made it worse for you, we'll drop in our email addresses. You can write on to us, and we'll set up another call where we'll confuse you even more.
Even more.
But
you can always restore your game back to the waypoint you had saved, your save point.
Exactly. It's like going down a rabbit hole. But I guess if Joel and me had to summarize, and I'll leave Joel for his last word. But for me, self-determination, I've been studying this for the last 10 years. I've enjoyed practicing it as a mediator. A lot of times I was tempted to give an idea or a solution, and I resorted to something that my teachers had taught me, including yourself, Joel, many years ago, that it's if you can go back to questioning And if you can go back to allowing parties to reflect, a lot of times when you're in the depths of conflict and entrenched there, you don't have time to reflect, and you're only looking at it from a very confirmation bias perspective. And if you can ask them the right questions, sometimes they can get to the right solutions. So I like the fact that we are looking at self-determination from both a control perspective and a choice perspective, and the fact that not having control and not having choice is equally a representation, an expression of self-determination, if I'm hearing right. But I'll leave the final word to you, Joel.
I'm not. You summed it up so well. I'm not sure I have a final word. Really, I mean,
many words. Then
I mean, many words. But I think if I had to say a couple of things about this, I say one of the things is that let's approach mediation from sort of a structural values perspective. So not one of those situations where we actually say mediations must be private session or must have joint sessions, or we can never have private session, because we know people who fight about it. Okay, I think if we just boil it down to what are the key organizing principles of values, right? Which is self-determination is one. Then we need to be aware of that. The second thing I will say is that let's not conflate some of those values, right? Because they may not have any necessary connection with one another. And thirdly, let's not think in a zero-sum fashion in relation to some of those values. Because essentially when we say self-determination is only this, we're thinking zero-sum. We're being very, very clear that it can only be this and nothing else.
Yeah.
But shouldn't that be up for also contextual interpretation and mediation? Right.
Absolutely.
Because the world is far more complex than we ourselves can imagine.
Yeah. And mediators who practice will tell you if following the textbook is absolutely not always possible. And you have to
exactly right. Exactly.
It's like getting a driver's license and then, of course, going out into the streets and crashing in those in the stones and parallel parking and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, thank you so much for joining us live, everyone. This is going to be, and Joel, of course, thank you so much for joining us today. I know it's a big week coming up in Singapore, and yet you made time for this. We're going to, of course, share this on different forums and spread the word about self-determination. But if you're a lawyer, if you're a business person exploring mediation, I think the message to you is simple. Mediation always offers you the choice in terms of how you want to participate, how you want to design, how you want to get involved, what you need to say, what you need to share. No one can ever force you to share information that you don't want to share. And most importantly, you have the choice to either agree to an agreement or not. You can walk away. And that's, I guess, the most simplest way of defining self-determination. But this has been a lot of fun. Joel, thank you so much. And I'll see you on the other side.
Thank you for having me.